Guest present online. I'm delighted to thank Rear Admiral Lakis and the running team for supporting us in enabling this conference. It's always great, they say, when somebody else makes your argument for you. I would like, from my capacity as chairman, to express my appreciation to our sponsor, with MPA being the most prominent, our exhibitors, our main contributors, and the strong supporters such as the Hellenic Navy and the Hellenic Naval Academy. In addition, I would like to address my appreciation to our VIP, the fourth Speaker of the Parliament, Mr. Vitsas. Thank you. The Mayor of Athens, Mr. Bakoyannis. Thank you. The Minister of Immigration and Asylum, Mr. Dimitrios. Members of the Parliament and ex-Admiral, Mr. Gikas. Thank you. And the distinguished speakers and presenters. It is always a delight to welcome Vice Admiral Matteo Pietro, Director, and Mike Stewart, Deputy Director Integrated Warfare, and the Dean of the Naval Academy, Professor Heliss. I feel proud and extremely overwhelmed to be part of this conference, where we are not limited to the four walls, but also beyond them. All credits goes to all of you who made it happen. Also, allow me to start with a quote of the forefather of geopolitics, Christidis. Mega is the state that controls the sea, projecting the importance of naval power. On the other hand, this was the meaning of Napoleon's phrase. Each state follows the policy imposed by its geography. And in our region, East Mediterranean, geography dictates it, just like them. Going a step further, the farther you look behind, the farther you could see ahead, is one of the main goals of this year's conference. Our aim is to create a unique environment where defense industry and academia can provide a dynamic mix of requirements, solution, and innovation. This is achieved by the number of plenaries and technical sessions supported by the adjusted events and exhibitions. Our plenaries will focus attention towards four main themes: the Mediterranean as a laboratory of naval warfare, where our distinguished speakers will set the geopolitical scheme and the problems. Defense procurement, policies, plan and procurement, where we will discuss the trends of today's and tomorrow's defense procurement. Digital ocean, from seabed to space, where we will see the latest technology and innovation in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. And the Mediterranean, crossroad of immigration, where we will try to analyze the environment and introduce the latest development in this critical area of European security. Last but not least, we end up tomorrow with a special plenary webinar where we analyzed the economic cost of Baco upgrade programs for the Hellenic Navy in conjunction with media partners, the TC Magazine and their site navaldefense.gr. Each of us is a part of fabric of the nation. I'm delighted that so many of you here today come from the industrial and adjustment partners, so we are not alone in what we are striving to do. This can be done if you understand better what armed forces and Coast Guard want and need, and understand how you can best help them. And in liberating and unlocking that potential, then our ambition can be achieved. Closing, I give a special welcome to NANAC annual meeting with their heads and delegation joining the conference. Plenaries and technical session. With no more delay, I kindly request the Mayor of Athens, Mr. Bakoyannis, to give the welcome address, and the first Speaker of the Parliament, Mr. Vitsas, to give a welcome and to declare the conference officially open. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Athens. It's a privilege to join you, and I would like to begin by paying tribute to the brave officers of the Greek armed forces, to whom we owe our sovereignty and our freedom, and who, despite the many challenges that we face, stand tall. And I would also like to welcome former Minister and now Speaker of the Parliament, Vitsas, and a good friend with whom we are having great cooperation in the past. And of course, my dear friend, Member of Parliament and Admiral Gigas, it's a pleasure to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we are all facing right now exceptional difficulties. We're at a time where we are facing unforeseen, I dare say, challenges. Not many would last year actually dare to even imagine a war on our continent. And yet, here we are, and it's very, very important that we all stand together. We all stand together with our friends and allies and partners in the Ukraine, our friends, allies and partners across NATO and across the West, as we defend not just Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and independence, but also our values. And these values are extremely important to the city of Athens. This is the cradle of democracy. This is where democracy was born thousands of years ago, and we know very, very well that democracy needs to be constantly nurtured, and democracy needs to be constantly defended. And that's why conferences such as these are extremely important, because we have the opportunity to build bridges and actually bring together different spheres, different ways of thinking, whether it's from the academia or the defense industry, from the armed forces or the political and decision-making worlds. Everyone needs to come together. Everyone needs to come closer, especially at times such as these. So once again, welcome to Athens. It's a great pleasure to see you again. I would like to congratulate Mr. Christidis and his great team on achieving this event. And I'm looking forward to more and more such meetings in the future. Many, many thanks, and have a good day.
Good morning to all of you, and from the beginning, forgive my accent, but it's a real pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Mayor of Athens for his kind words. I consider Kostas Bakoyannis as a friend. We are opponents to the political, but not enemies. Not enemies, and we must learn to discuss all the themes and to try to find the best for the Greek people. And as we speak about this, the best for the Greek people is to have a life in peace, in progress, and to try to cooperate with all the countries that they are in our neighborhood. So we have the most important thing to gain stability, peace, and we have to give to our children. Mr. Bakoyannis has a lot. I think I have one.
I have enough for both. I have enough for both.
Yes. As my father. So, it's very nice to be among friends, and I wish we have a very good conference. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the MAST 2022 conference, which has as its main theme, as you know, the Mediterranean, a laboratory for naval warfare. The Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, which geographically unite Europe, Africa, and Asia, are within the geographical boundaries of a huge arc of crisis that stretches from the border of Russia, continuing through the Mediterranean and the Middle East, all the way to the Indian Ocean. The easy access to the Eastern Mediterranean, which is possible from all points of the horizon, makes it a sea of pivotal importance with increased commercial and military value. In discussing this region of our planet, since ancient times, some words that come to mind are great civilization, but also bloody conflicts and uncertainty. In the old days, it used to be piracy and contraband. Today, criminal groups that operate with the aim of illegal trafficking in people, weapons, and drugs are just some of the activities that make up cross-border organized crime in the Eastern Mediterranean region. A constant state of conflict in the Middle East and poor living conditions in Africa produce continuous flow of migrants and refugees towards Europe. The handling of this flow is critical for the prosperity of EU and the rest of Mediterranean nations, and also for the humanitarian values that Europe wishes to uphold, at least in theory. The wars in Syria and the ensuing political unrest has also created an enormous pool of migrants and refugees from Turkey to Europe by sea, using routes to either reach or avoid the Greek islands. This means that there is a need to expand monitoring and rescue operation in the open waters of South Crete and the Libyan Sea. Let's not forget thousands of people continue to lose their lives in European waters each year. This is simply unacceptable. There is no shortage of existing and potential flashpoints in the wider region. Overall, Overall, there is no doubt we are indeed talking about a region of our planet where the potential for economic prosperity, growth, and progress is enormous. But so is the potential of conflict and instability. A region where the geopolitical balance point is constantly and rapidly changing. A region that has always lived and always will live in interesting times, as our Chinese friends say. I remember that the composer, Mr. Moustakis, wrote a song that says in one place that Mediterranean has born civilization and the Jesus Christ itself. That means that it's an area that is very important for all the world, Of course, there are other areas that is very important. The Pacific, let's say. It's very important for USA, China, Australia, and so on. But Mediterranean is an important place all over the years. A history of 5,000 years that appears what the humankind wants, is able to have, or is able to create, or is able to disaster. This is, I think, very special. Indeed, the Eastern Mediterranean is the fastest shipping route between the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. In a sense, a commercial crossroads that attracts the interest of great powers of our time, including, of course, China, that is investing in the use of soft power to achieve its geopolitical goals. So far, it has managed to establish its presence in critical commercial centers of the Eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the USA has no intention of withdrawing from the Eastern Mediterranean. This is easily demonstrated but by the importance that the USA attaches to Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Israel, and Egypt. This is confirmed by the American strategic presence in Greece through the military bases in Alexandroupolis, Volos, and above all, Suda Bay. The USA is seeking to make its presence felt and increase its influence in global energy flow routes based on power and a more aggressive foreign policy. In practice, the USA does not favor options or energy projects that are not under its direct or indirect control or may go against its interests. Therefore, Europe finds itself in the very uncomfortable position of being a group of advanced economies with very few natural resources of its own, seeing ways to remain competitive in the midst of a furious competition among giants, the US, China, and of course Russia. Competition for energy resources among many Eastern Mediterranean states has also created conflicts of the creation of zones and borders. Disputes over land and sea borders are notoriously complex. However, international law and the fundamental principles of respect and national sovereignty and territorial integrity, the prohibition of the use of force coupled with mutual economic interests can offer viable and peaceful solutions. Unfortunately, this is not the case regarding the polemical posture of Turkey toward Greece and Cyprus. In this regard, Turkey is a notable destabilizing factor in the Eastern Mediterranean region. This happens for various internal political and economic reasons, and also, of course, because of the strategic image that this country, Turkey, has for itself, that of a great regional power, which is its ultimate and unrealistic, I would add, goal in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, especially regarding the exploitation of the wealth-producing sources of the region. Meanwhile, Egypt perhaps emerges as a country with enormous importance in the Southeast Mediterranean region. Under certain conditions, it can prove to be a catalyst for peace, stability, and economic cooperation of the countries of the wider region and beyond. It is worth noting that dealing with contemporary tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean is also a key importance for the European Union. The EU has a direct interest in the energy development in the South-East Mediterranean and in the wider region of Middle East, North Africa, as it considers that the most important discoveries of natural gas deposits in the region are potentially a great opportunity to reduce its dependence on Russian gas and achieve energy self-sustainability. In this direction, the EU now politically and financially supports the prospect of building the East Med pipeline. All this, of course, must inevitably take into account the Russian and Ukrainian war and the geopolitical connection between the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean through the Aegean Sea and the Dardanelles. Needless to say, the action of Russia go against the very essence of public international law, and as such need to be condemned by the international community. That said, it is also important to note that international law is not a tool to be used against one's adversary when it is convenient and to be decided when it is not. Rather, it is and always was the very foundation of international peace and order. It needs to apply equally for all states, big and small, powerful and weak, Western and Eastern or Southern. Only this will give us the capacity to support prosperity, peace, and security. Closing. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts this morning, and I look forward to a rewarding discussion. Thank you very much. And Mr. Christidis, Admiral Christidis, promised me that what will be said in this conference will be in the same way have every one of us, so we can return and read again and see where are we going as a humanitarian civilization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Vice Admiral Vitsas, President of the Hellenic Submarines Association and Chairman of the first session of the conference. It's a special privilege for me to welcome you all to the Maritime Air Systems and Technologies MED 2022 Conference and Exhibition. I'm particularly proud and happy for a number of reasons. Firstly, because this conference is taking place for the first time in Greece after 16 years. Secondly, because the Hellenic Submarines Association is the co-organizer for this conference with MAST community and network. Thirdly, because during this conference and exhibition, you will have the opportunity to hear and see some of the latest developments in maritime and air technology, recent innovations presented by researchers, and finally, young students presenting their unique ideas for the future in defense and security. I hope at the end of the conference, all of you will be satisfied. I would like to thank all sponsors for their great contribution, the Hellenic Navy and the Hellenic Naval Academy for their support in the success of this conference, and of course, Rear Admiral Koulouris, Vice President of the Hellenic Submarines Association, for his hard work throughout the last 12 months to organize on the best level possible this event. Thank you all again for your presence here, and I wish you to have a fruitful conference and enjoyable time in Athens. So, with no further ado, I will pass the floor to Vice Admiral retired Vasilios Martzoukos to address East Mediterranean security, deterioration and trends. Vice Admiral Martzoukos served on board patrol boats, frigates, headquarters of the Hellenic Fleet and the General Staff, CO of the Fast Patrol Boats Command and Frigates Command, CO of Stewart Naval Base, and CO of the Hellenic Naval Academy. After 37 years, he retired as Vice Admiral, Honourable Commander of the Hellenic Naval Academy. Currently, he is the Vice Chairman of Heliss. Admiral, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for being invited to participate in this conference. I will have to present the situation in Eastern Mediterranean, and I'm afraid that the security situation is deteriorating. We all know that Eastern Mediterranean is of a global strategic importance, and it's valuable for Europe, for stability, prosperity, and safety. Let's say a few about the geopolitical environment. US remains focused in the Pacific, but since lately we have the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and also we have increased instability in the Eastern Mediterranean. US has increased its diplomatic and military involvement in the area. The level of common strategic approach between US and EU is going to affect the evolutions in this area. Russia is actively involved in the area, seeking influence, political security, military, economic, and energy gains. China has included our area in the Silk Road, and of course keeps close relations with resource-rich states in Africa and Gulf region. Turkey's autonomous and revisionist choice approaching Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and China sets new parameters in the area's geopolitical equation. The main sources of instability are all these, but the blue ones, I think that at this moment are the most important. The Russian invasion, energy security, irregular migration, and interstate claims and disputes, with, of course, Turkey as a protagonist. We can see the world population and Asia. There's a sharp increase in world population. By the end of this century, it's going to be 11.5 billion. Asia is also increased at least through 2070. But here in Africa, it's not just a sharp increase, it's an explosion of demographics, which is going to affect the rest of the area immediately. By now, as we're speaking, Africa has 1.3 billion, and by the end of this century, it's going to be 4.5. On the contrary, we can see the trends in Europe, and also things are worse in Southern Europe. That means a tsunami of migration in the coming years. The routes are known. These are the numbers of 2020 year. And the migration policy in Europe depends on the view that Europeans have for themselves for the future. If they view Europe as a common market with unconditionally tolerant, multi-ethnic, multicultural economic zone, then there's one way of policy. The other view is for Europe to preserve as a vital interest its values, its cultural heritage based on secularism and democracy. This is another path. And this is another policy. Hydrocarbons in Eastern Mediterranean. We all know that all the countries in the area have to deal with this. We can see Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, Greece. So is this an opportunity or it raises a potential of conflict? Since now we have an interstate cooperation aspirations based on UNCLOS, except Turkey. All the other countries are cooperating smoothly. You can see the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum in the middle, the cooperation between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, and Egypt, the IGB with Bulgarians, Alexandroupolis, LNG. And here we can see why Greece is going to be an energy hub in the coming years. And this is the EastMed proposal, the EastMed pipeline, which is going to solve problems in Europe, since it's going to be able to carry 12 billion cubic meters per year, and in the second phase, 20 billion. And if in the future, in the third phase, it's possible to connect EastMed with the Persian Gulf gas through pipelines passing through Arab states and Israel, then EastMed is going to be a permanent pipeline of great importance. You can see also the Euro-Asia interconnector, electricity, and Euro-Africa interconnector. And of course, the LNG installations in Greece, the Vitsas, Alexandroupolis, the IGP pipeline. Greece preserves national and Western interests because Greece's borders are European borders. These are some photos from Souda Bay and Alexandroupolis and troops, allied troops cooperating. Greece has settled its maritime zones with Italy and partially with Egypt based on UNCLOS, and is ready to do the same with all the countries of the area, provided that everybody understands the same things about international law. Now, Turkey as a factor of stability. Its views, claims, and practices decline from international law and UNCLOS. As a NATO member, doesn't apply the sanctions against Russia, exploiting the fact for economic benefits. Possesses S-400 missiles. The Russian built its nuclear factories. Applicant member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Setting obstacles for Sweden and Finland in entering NATO. It uses immigrants as a political tool against EU, Greece, and Cyprus. Turkish interventions and invasions destabilize the area. Relations with Muslim Brotherhood and other extremists. Threatens the sovereignty and sovereign rights of Greece and Cyprus. We have daily provocations. Here we are talking about an autonomous, expansive Islamic Turkey with anti-Western rhetoric. And the Turkish vision, maybe it is to be a Muslim leader or a Eurasian member, or both. As a peripheral Turkish, the peripheral Turkish ambition maybe are incompatible with the stability in the area. Here we can see where Turkey has been expanded militarily. And some President Erdogan's views. You can see one cannot be a secularist and a Muslim at the same time. This is Erdogan's views. Assimilation in a Western of Muslim immigrants in a Western society is a crime against humanity, etc., etc. Democracy is like a bus. You ride it until you arrive at your destination, then you step off. This is the impression about democracy. The West uses Ukraine and Greece as tools against Russia and Turkey, respectively. We all know the record of Turkey concerning human rights. It's not necessary to continue. We all know the Turkey's nuclear ambitions. Erdogan said that it is unacceptable that Turkey cannot have nuclear weapons. We all know that he's cooperating to this direction closely with Pakistan and China. So, Russia is not the only invader. Which really are the borders of Turkish heart? The Ottoman Empire, for a second time? Who knows? The national oath of Kemal. Now, so we have intervention in Libya, and we have two great military bases there, one naval and the other air base. And of course, hundreds of thousands of extremists from Syria in order, obviously, to promote democracy and elections in Libya. intervention in Armenia, invasion in Cyprus, invasion in Syria, where Kurds are the target, invasion in Iraq, again, Kurds are the target, and also the oil there. So all Europeans have a common knowledge of Turkish heritage on invasions. So Turkish conditions for a dialogue with Greece are these: bilateral political dialogue for the whole spectrum of Turkish claims. The Greek islands and Cyprus do not have exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. 172 Greek islands are not Greek. The militarized East Aegean islands belong to Turkey. We will come suddenly one night. Turkey protects by all means the blue homeland. The Turkish MOU with Libya is not negotiable. The two sovereign countries in Cyprus is a fact. The Republic of Cyprus does not exist. Any expansion of Greece's territorial waters is a casus belli. The Muslim minority in Thrace is Turkish. And this is the result of this condition. Down there you can see also another proposal that Turkey has made to Israel and Palestinians, like in Libya. Of course, it was rejected by Israel. And as you see also, Cyprus has no waters. All around is Turkish. Here everybody can see the Turkish aspirations. Half of the Aegean is Turkish, Mavi Vatan, blue homeland, etc., etc. So, under the previous Turkish conditions, some Western leaders and heads of international organizations promote negotiations and press for a dialogue between Greece and Turkey. These leaders simply encourage revisionist and expanding attitudes, undermining Greece and Cyprus and favoring Turkey. Greece is open for a dialogue with Turkey over the maritime zones and based on UNCLOS. The Turkish reply is Mitsotakis yok, or Greece and Turkey are not equal. Because of this situation, Greece is increasing its military spending. Last year, it was 3.8 of GDP. So, some brief recommendations. Invaders generally must be stopped. Selective reactions damage reliability, not only Putin. The explosive combination of demographics and illegal immigration in Europe has to be faced. Being in an energy crisis, EU has to exploit Mediterranean's hydrocarbons without delay. Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum is open to any country respecting UNCLOS. Countries undermining the process should face a dynamic Western negative stance. Aegean Sea is the axis between Suda Bay and Alexandroupolis. Cyprus' geographic position is critical for the Eastern Mediterranean. Any geopolitical change on Aegean or in Cyprus damages Western vital interests, assists non-Western revisionist countries, including Russia, and destabilize the status quo in the area. The 20th centuries, the two world wars, show that Greece stands historically to the right side of history. On a value level, Greece doesn't simply belong to the West, since Greece is the West. guarding mainly the values of democracy and secular state. Thank you very much.
Now, as Rear Admiral Koulouris, Deputy Commander of the Hellenic Fleet, will not attend due to operational obligations, we'll move on to the next speaker, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart is a retired Navy captain, having served in both the active and reserve U.S. Navy as a naval aviator, flight instructor, and landing signal officer. After leaving active duty, he served the aerospace industry. In government, he has served both in the office of the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Navy. Currently, he serves in the office of the Chief of the Naval Operations as Director of the Unmanned Task Force. Mr. Stewart is a Secretary of the Navy, distinguished graduate of the United States Naval Academy, a graduate of Naval War College, and holds an MBA for the Harvard Business School. Mr. Stewart, you have the floor, and he will address on naval innovation.
Good morning, and I'm thrilled to be here. I echo the comments of the mayor. It's pretty humbling to be here in the shadow of the Acropolis with what's going on right now in terms of war, foundation and of democracy, and to be here and having these discussions is somewhat surreal. But first, I'd like to thank Greece, the mayor of Athens, city of Athens, and Hellenic Navy for allowing me to come here. So thank you. So this talk is going to be, I think, slightly different than the one before, but given my background and kind of what we're talking about. And I may be talking about something you may not think normally I would talk about in the military. And it's really about innovation. And I think you'll see that I'm not going to be talking about technology as much as the whole notion of disruption and how you actually get an organization to respond to a disruption and a threat. Next slide. Speaking of technology. So the first thing I would say is speed matters. What do we mean by that? So imagine that you're President Zelensky and you have a 40-mile column of tanks converging on Kyiv. And you're thinking about it, and you call up the military and you say, what do you have for me? The answer he probably does not want is, it's going to be amazing in 2040, the stuff we have. I think he probably thinks, what do you have for me right now, and what can you rush? And so I know in the United States military, we're not used to thinking in speed that fast, right? We've had a fairly predominant position for years, and our cycles normally go in 5 years, about as fast as they can go. What I'm tasked with right now is delivering capability inside 5 years, and the capability that will disrupt decision-making and decision calculus and rush it quickly. So speed does matter. Focus matters. What do I mean by that? So I'm the head of the Unmanned Task Force, and essentially the Disruptive Task Force. So there's a million things I could be doing with Unmanned. I could have 1,000 science projects that I'm thinking about. What we do that is different is I go to the operational commanders, the fleet commanders, and ask them very specifically, what is important to you? What is the operational problem that you have to solve? Do you have to stop an invasion? Do you have to think about a minefield? Do you have to think about being a contested and denied environment? What specifically are you trying to solve? And then from there, I will look very specifically at technology. So I don't think about 1,000 things. There's an old quote from Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs, if you know the history of Apple, he had started the company, then he was fired. They brought somebody in named Scully. Scully then started he'd been in marketing and soft drink industry, and he started doing 1,000 what are called brand extensions. Apple was about to go out of business. So they fired Scully and brought back Steve Jobs. And he looked at 1,000 things that Apple was doing and he said, why are we doing 1,000 things badly? Let's do 4 things well. So in the Unmanned Task Force that we do, we think very specifically about a very limited set of things that we have to do very, very well. And when I talk to the fleet commanders, they would say, I don't need 1,000 great things. I need 3 or 4 things that are going to change the decision calculus. So focus matters. So I make sure that I pool resources and we pool the best people to think about it, okay? They're not working on 1,000 different things. When the first or the third piece, innovation, everybody wants to talk to me about technology. I would say that we are awash in technology. There's a ton of technology. It's getting to it and getting to it quickly, right? And so you have to think about organization. So there's an old example in business school. I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say it because I love the example. I had an Israeli game theory professor, and there's a very famous company in the United States, ice cream, Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And it was made by people up in Vermont that are, it's kind of a crazy company. And so this guy played a video of the company, and it's everybody running around and playing and dogs jumping around and nobody sort of going crazy. And then he showed their profitability. And he said, what do you think the lesson of Ben & Jerry's is? Why do they make so much money? And so everybody said, well, it's because they're not like the military. They're not hierarchical. They're not strict. Everybody's validated. Everybody has a say. And he let that go on for about 20 minutes. And he said, no, that's not the lesson. He said the lesson is no matter how badly you try to screw up your company, you might have such a great product that you're going to make money. And so why do I tell that story? So I think about the way we are organized right now and the way we're specifically in the Navy. And I have to question, are we organized for disruption, right? So the US Navy has been fairly predominant since 1945. Well, now we're being disrupted. And disruption is an overused term, but I look at it, having been in business, is it's no different than the American auto industry being disrupted by the Japanese, Nokia being disrupted by Apple, Boeing being disrupted by Airbus. So guess what? The US military is now being disrupted. And we have to think about our organization. And we have to take a look at our organization and say, is it built for speed and innovation? And I took a look at it and thought, no, it wasn't, right? And we'll talk about it. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is experimentation. It's kind of what you guys want to talk about. And what does experimentation really mean? It means really experimenting in the field with technology and around an operational problem. What in the world does that mean? What it doesn't mean is look at a piece of technology just by itself and stare at it and try to perfect it for 10 years. It means get a prototype, minimum viable product, get it in an operational setting where we're fighting experiment. Why is that important? Isn't that what you guys do all the time? It wasn't what we were doing. So let me give you an example, right? So if you took a pilot from the Battle of Midway in 1942 and you put him on an American aircraft carrier right now, I don't think he'd say, wow, I can't understand what you're doing. He'd say it's a bigger carrier, you've got faster airplanes, but you're fighting essentially the same way. We are now going to fight very differently with disruptive technologies, AI, unmanned systems, highly distributed. That's a very different way of fighting, as you'll see in the presentation tomorrow. So what does that mean? Well, take a look at the US military in 1898 to 1941. So in 1898, 1900, the US military was essentially a Coast Guard. 40 years later, projected power and defeated Japan after losing half its fleet. How did that happen? Well, it created naval aviation, it experimented with submarine warfare and amphibious warfare. So we experimented and failed a lot. So we're back in that business, right? So up until this point, I would say, the US military, and I suspect your militaries, were not really comfortable with a lot of risk. Your programs can't fail, you've got to deliver. Well, now we're experimenting and we're just seeing what works. And we're experimenting on very, very rapid cycles. Next slide. Cool, that's me. So what does that mean? So let me put this in perspective. So when we started the Unmanned Task Force, we were delivering unmanned capability. What the slide is trying to tell you is, so fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 27, I looked at all the technology that was being delivered. It was very little. If speed matters, and we're right now, if there's a war going on right now in Ukraine, and you see what's going on in China, an acceptable answer is not, it's going to be amazing in 10 years. I have to deliver things very, very quickly. So I would take a look at your own portfolio and see what are you actually delivering in the next 5 years? And is it going to be relevant? Is it going to change anybody's decision cycles? What is this slide trying to show? It's to show that this is a venture capital model. This is very different than the way the US military normally invests things. So what we do is we take a look at a lot of things. So all that's showing you is that I look at a lot of things, and then I very, very quickly do an analysis and decide which one of the things I actually want to move forward. So I take a look at a lot of things, and then we do a risk analysis, and then we move it down the pipeline, and then we seed fund it for a few $1 million, and then we experiment with it, learn a little bit more, and then seed fund it more. And then eventually we get maybe 3 things that we actually want to field and scale. As opposed to, what we don't do is start 20 different programs and then they go off independently, and 10 years from now we discover their failures. And by that time I can't turn them off, right? So we do this very, very quickly. So that's an actual, I don't have the actual results up there, but we've looked at 15 things. We're fielding maybe 3 inside a year. Okay, we're about to scale 3 things inside a year, which is for our military very, very fast, right? How do we do that? Does anybody know the story of General McChrystal in Iraq, the team of teams story? He had the best trained, best equipped, best funded, best everything, special operations, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Green Berets, and he routinely was getting beaten by Al-Qaeda. He couldn't understand why. They were moving faster than he was. So if General McChrystal wanted to take an Al-Qaeda leader out in 2 or 3 days, he realized it would take him 2 weeks to get the concurrence, the agreements to be able to move. So he had to talk to the US Navy, Air Force, Marines, the Iraqi military, the State Department, CIA, NSA. And by the time he got all those agreements, it took forever, right? And so he realized he didn't have a technology problem, he had an organizational problem, right? So what does this mean? It means that this is the way I'm organized, right? So I report to the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, but I also report to the Head of Acquisition. So I essentially am a strategy requirements guy, but my deputy is from the Office of Naval Research, so he's a technology guy. But next to him are the fleets. Next to him are what we call the warfare centers and the Defense Innovation University. Unit, long flight. And so we're very horizontally integrated. So when we look at very specific things, if I go to a fleet commander and he or she says, I have this very specific problem, I gather that team and we focus, and we, in 2 weeks, we'll decide if we're going to move something forward or not. And then we'll move it down the innovation pipeline. Now, this may seem incredibly boring. And, if you read the US press, I'm sure your press says the same things. US military is too slow, they're too stupid, they don't understand the threat, they don't understand technology, they don't understand. Look, I understand the threat, I think I understand technology. And the reason if we have a problem, I think it's an organization, the way we're organized, right? So what I would say to you is if you're looking at your organization and you're just saying go faster, it may not be able to go faster because of the way decisions are made, right? So people get frustrated with the US military, and this seems like an incredibly boring thing to do, but it works, right? So General McChrystal, when he reorganized his winter organization, he actually went from making a decision every 2 weeks to up to 70 a day, right? And so what we're finding is we have compressed our timeline from things that would take 5 years to 8 months just by changing the organization and having rapid innovation cycles. Let me show you what that looks like. So you may have heard about Task Force 59. Task Force 59 is using unmanned technology and AI in the Arabian Gulf. What I want to point out to you in this slide is how fast these guys went. So you'll take a look in the top left. In June of 2021, that was just an idea that somebody thought about. A month later, that's me, by the way, writing on the window. Hopefully they can erase it. That's in Manama, but that's in the Four Seasons of Manama. I haven't gotten the bill, so I think they must have been able to erase it. But 1 month later, we're designing it with Captain Master, Commodore Master, who will be here. In September 2021, we commissioned it, In October 2021, there were exercises. In December 2021, there were exercises in the Gulf of Aqaba. And in January, February, there was the largest unmanned exercise in the Gulf of Aqaba and in the Arabian Gulf. So that's inside 1 year. How did we move so quickly? Well, firstly, it was organization. Secondly, and this is really for the industry guys, but also the military, is that nothing was purchased. Everything was leased. So that was commercial technology that was leased. So you see the sail drone that's gotten a lot of press. We don't buy those things. We lease them. We lease ours. We lease Starlink. We also lease something called a Martzoukos boat. Okay, so that's crazy. Why are you doing that? Does anybody know the story of SpaceX? Where did SpaceX really come from? So think about it. So the U.S. military, the NASA had gotten to a point where it had gotten so expensive that it could no longer affect or could afford commodity space launch. We outsourced it to the Russians. Thankfully, we got out of that business. But then Elon Musk came in and took a look at it and said, I think I can do this cheaper. And everybody said he's crazy, he's an idiot, he's out of control. And he blew up 7 rockets. And then what happened on the 8th rocket? He was successful. So fast forward to today, we have outsourced commodity space launch to SpaceX. That's a fee for service. So can you do this for the military side? Now, am I going to do a fee for service or lease a nuclear aircraft carrier? Probably not. A nuclear submarine? Probably not. But a sail drone that I can put a camera on and put them all over the Arabian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, the Mediterranean, and then take the data, put it in a central repository, and then run algorithms on it. And what does that mean? So imagine you have 100 contacts, and for the naval officers in here, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You have 100 contacts, you have no idea you're trying to make sense of those things. And you have 20 naval officers right here on streaming, you have some Navy captain hysterical, you have an admiral saying what's going on. I know that sounds very, very unfamiliar, but, and it's hard to make sense of what those 100 contacts. Imagine on the next operations center, you have the same 100 contacts, but you have 7 different sensors. You have space, you have what's called AIS data, you have UAVs, you have USVs. Taking the data, putting it in the repository, running algorithms, telling you the probability of those 100 contacts, of those 100, those 10 really matter because they look like what you're interested in. They're registered to somebody you're interested in. They just went by somebody you're probably interested in. And you're just running the probability. Does that mean I'm going to shoot? No, but it means I'm going to go take a look at it, right? Very, very important. So another thing I want to talk to you about. If you look on the bottom right, after that experiment happened in February 2022, in March, those things were on mission. What does that mean? It means that the experiment concluded, but then they had selected some things and they had them on mission. They had sail drones on mission and more things on mission, and then augmented with Starlink and with AI. So it's all about speed. So inside 1 year, we had an unmanned fleet that was starting to scale. What else is going on? Partners and allies. So what's interesting about the strategy is what the U.S. vision, you may have heard about the 100 USD fleet. The U.S. really is looking at maybe having 25% of those, and then having the GCC countries and other countries adopt the same technology with data standards, sending the data central and having a very distributed set of sensors. So imagine that in the Mediterranean or wherever you want to have it. You have different countries participating, sharing data, and really then having robust understanding of what's going on at a much, much cheaper price point that you're doing it correctly, or that you're doing currently right now. So think about disruption, right? We don't have, and the US right now does not have endless money to compete with endless amounts of countries, especially with near peer. So we have to think differently. We have to be faster. We have to be organized for disruption. We have to think about cost as a limiting factor. And we have to think about the ways to operate with industry and our partners very, very differently. The last thing I'll say is, when I first showed up in the NAMAC in NATO 4 years ago as a former Navy pilot, everybody wanted to talk to me about standards. Of course, I wanted to talk about fighters and things like that. And I thought the standards discussion was the most boring discussion in the world. I now think it's the most important discussion by far, because only together are we going to actually be able to prevail. So you have to have standards that you think about, And why is that important? Because if you have distributed sensors, you have a common standard, you have a much better picture at a much lower price point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart, for the thorough analysis of how US see the US. So, questions?
I'm Vice Admiral retired Dimitrios. My question is, I am impressed, I must say, at the approach of Task Force 59. I also understand that there is a shared approach to share costs for resources and sensors, etc., etc. So how would you see Greece at the current point is deprived of the ability to build up its forces as fast as we would like? So how would we, like an idea, if we would operate US assets in the East Med? So US provides the asset, we take on the manpower, the salaries, etc.
So I can't, so I'm obviously not a policy guy, so I can't answer that, but what I would tell you is that a year ago, somebody would have said, oh, not possible, can't imagine. What I would tell you now is that people are very open-minded to different approaches. So I would say definitely make the proposal. I mean, if you talk to somebody like Vice Admiral Cooper in Fifth Fleet, he's doing things that people couldn't realize a year ago. And so I would say never, but I have no idea. But I would say that we would take a hard, I know my task force takes a look at things like that, just very, very different ways of thinking. But and notice that you're not talking about technology, you're talking about the business operation. So we look at the business as well, right? I mean, you are talking about technology, but
I think you cannot separate them because once you start the activities, I would use the word activities, create requirements, demands, and then they become strategic in those demands. And when resources are limited for a number of nations, maybe for the US, much for Greece, but as a collective, we can do much more. So you don't need to pay sailors as much as we pay them, or crew, or insure them. But imagine like we have an asset that we operate, and we get a big part of the operating cost doing supporting common interests.
I think I get the business model. So I mean, I can't make a definitive statement as a policy, but I would say I would love to talk about it. So.
I'm not expecting an early bird from here, so that's not as an idea. I took it as an idea, and I understand the political, what could be political implications. But as a business model, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and really understand what's happening in the Arabian Gulf is that my understanding is the individual countries are leasing the individual assets and then sharing the data collectively. And of course, then there's a lot of security questions about that. But I'll tell you that one of the things that we're doing, why experimentation is key, is it forces those discussions, right? So a year ago, I was asked a lot of questions about unmanned, and a lot of legal questions, a lot of policy questions. And people would say, well, I don't know, I have no idea. When you actually experiment with things, and then suddenly the Iranians pick up one of your unmanned vessels, then you start really contextualizing what does it mean to be unmanned, and how far away can you have the asset? And then, anyway, experimentation is very important. But your original question, yeah, sure. I would say that I don't think it would be shot down immediately, but it would be explored.
Yes, please. I'm Paul Fire, the NATO Industry Advisory Group. Sir, you underscore the importance of standards.
Can you hear the microphone, please? You can hear the clearly.
Oh, you are? I'll speak a little bit louder.
Yeah, it's coming, it's coming.
So you underscore the importance of standards. From your perspective, should those standards be imposed by governments or NATO to industry, or the other way around, developed by industry, or a combination of both?
So that's a great question. And let me tell you why I think that's a great question. So again, until you start experimenting, standards is an academic discussion, and people would say, boy, we really need standards, and nothing ever happens. And so what I've seen is, I'm sort of hesitating on this. So I went to Israel and I wanted to understand how they did AI. And so what they really told me was that the government had to control the standards in a partnership with industry, right? And what they said was, until you have a standard, stop talking about AI and distributed sensors, right? And so what they said is they spent 18 months really thinking about those standards and working with industry and really laying and locking down contracts and law and saying, we will control the standards. Now, we may outsource that to a third party, but the government will own the data rights. And the industry has to get beyond it. And the way they impose it is they basically said, unless you adhere to the standard, then we're just not gonna play with you. We're done. And they had to have the support of the government to actually go do that. And so they did. And so once they solved that problem, according to them, they moved forward. Now the US, with smaller companies that I'm seeing running AI, is doing the same approach, especially with smaller companies, saying, we are gonna control the standard, and unless you comply, then we're not gonna do it. So, but I think it has to be a cooperation. But it wasn't just, it's not today's the standard, whatever. I think there had to be a lot of discussions, and it was hard, but I think the government has to own it.
Kevin LeMage, CMRE. So, Michael, thanks for your talk. I was curious, and I've asked you this before. Could you talk a little bit about the competitive environment that you apply to down select 1,000 maybe not so great ideas to 4 winners?
I'm now sorry I deleted one slide because it showed that. That's a great question. So what we think about is the limiting factors. Okay, what does that mean? So we look beyond just the technology. So we think about the concept of operations. We think beyond the environment. Does it have the networks it needs to? Can it work in a contested denied environment, wherever we want to work? Does it have the payload? Does it have the infrastructure? And when is it going to deliver, right? So I'm inside 5 years. And so we look at collective risk. So if you look at that team, it's just not technology, guys. So if I'm looking at, if I need a Navy SEAL in the room, the Navy SEAL will be there. If I need a explosive ordnance guy, they'll be there. If I need a missile guy, they will be there. DARPA will be there. Something we call SCO will be there. So we make sure we look at the entire thing. The legal guys will be there. And so if I think I want to go use this thing, we will look at the entirety from CONOPS, legal, employment, infrastructure, time and delivery, and then we'll make a decision, right? But the other thing, what we don't do is we don't say, so therefore give me $1 billion. No, give me maybe $5 million to advance that slightly, right? And then we keep proving it through a bunch of stages, as opposed to, this is just an idea I have, give me a bunch of money, and 10 years you're gonna know the answer. We're gonna know the answer in about 2.5, 3 weeks if we're even interested in it. And so one of the powerful things in my opinion that we're doing is we're sifting through, we're just passing the idea, really getting the ones that really have merit and lowering the risk that way, if that makes sense to you.
In the first of all, I wish to wish the members of the committee for giving our speakers, for giving very clear and precise information on the topic. I'm Ramli from Malaysia with the Defense University. I have one question with respect to the Admiral from okay. Before I have a question, let me highlight something. When it's about unclogged, United Nations Convention on the Sea is being ratified by all member states. Just far, 20 countries not yet ratified, including the United States. Therefore, my question to Admiral, how will you foresee the use of unclogged in East Mediterranean? Because some small island, they're not sure where it goes to, whether based on the Black Sea. And how you say that a country will not follow unclogged? It's not right. The thing is, today, I have to earlier, 20 countries, including the United States, Malaysia, China has ratified, and a few other minor countries not yet ratified unclogged. So how do you pursue issue of claim and over claim? This is my point, especially in East Mediterranean Sea. Thank you, sir.
So if I understand the question, it is about the countries that do not ratify the UNCLOS. Okay. I think that even those countries respect UNCLOS, because UNCLOS creates a frame which is respected globally. USA, for example, is respecting UNCLOS and promotes this method of solving problems. So UNCLOS, I think, provides all the spectrum of possible problems to solve. We know that the islands without economic life and with no people on them do not have exclusive economic zone, etc., etc. But we have to have a point of reference in order to solve problems. No country can do whatever dictates its power. This is the way that we pursue peace and stability. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes. That's the Ehrenberg from the Technical Conference Committee from Germany. Question to Michael Stewart. Thanks for your great presentation. Two questions. In your task group, did you also look at the underwater space for the unmanned vehicles and at the air space? First question. The second one, you talked about experimentation, and from America 10 years ago came the CD&E concept. Is that still being followed? Did you follow that in your task group, or is it not that actual anymore? Concept development and experimentation, of course, net-centric warfare, these things. Thank you.
So to the first question, we do all domains. So I look at anything. So we absolutely have robust underwater. We have space. We have anything. And so my focus, and this is very subtle. It would seem to be very obvious, but and I hate to use business terms, but I'm really thinking about the voice of the customer. What does that mean? The voice of the customer is the fleet commander, is the warfighter. So so let me tell you what that means, right? So there was my deputy from the Office of Naval Research, and when I talk to the Office of Naval Research, you hear about people say the Valley of Death in innovation. Oh, things get stuck in the Valley of Death. And so this is my perspective. I invite you to push back or give your perspective. When I talk to people in the S&T community and scientists, and they're complaining about the Valley of Death, what I've noticed is if you talk to the warfighter and there's a very, very specific need that he or she has, there's no Valley of Death. It goes very, very, very quickly, right? So I make sure I'm very focused on whatever the problem is. Now, that doesn't mean stop all other innovation. And I'm not saying that, but right now, inside 1 or 2 years, I'm very focused on what the fleet commander needs right now. Right? Number two, we're across all the domains, right? So I just go and talk to the fleet commander, and I look at, and then we look at a very specific problem, what you're trying to solve, and then we look at the most appropriate domain, the most appropriate technology to go solve that, right? So we look at everything. To the second part, I don't know the acronym, and so all I can tell you is that we look at concept development. So we look at the warfighting problem, then we think of how we would actually go do this with the technology. So can you comment? Are you aware of this?
You're talking about operational experimentation.
Yeah.
Concept development and experimentation. Yeah. So, I mean, the way you're doing it is you're taking these capabilities into operations, basically. Well, first of all, you have an operational experiment like an IMX, and you're evaluating the capabilities in that exercise and validating your decisions, and then you're taking these concepts into operations. That's
So I'm not familiar with the term, but I'll tell you the way we do it, right? And what's different. So the whole concept of minimum viable product, right? So what we can do is we try to look at things that can solve a problem just good enough right now. Not everything can be a Rolls Royce. Things can just be a normal. And if it's just going to do the problem, and it's going to do a great price point, then great, I'm going to go do it, right? Because I don't want to have one thing of a super expensive, exquisite thing. I'd much rather have a bunch of little cheap things that I can highly distribute it and do something, right? And so, but the key point is that we don't just sit there and keep it in the lab. We force it into the operational setting with the warfighter so we can innovate very quickly. So when we did IMX, we had the warfighter, we had the technology guys, we had the lawyers, the coders, we had everybody in the room. And by being able to experiment on the fly around the concept or around the problem, guys were coding with 7 different companies cooperating and doing things that they told us that would have taken 2 years, they were doing hours, right? Just because you were focused very specifically and contextualizing what the problem was. And another example we had of an unmanned boat that we brought in the theater, completely for a different reason. And some Navy SEALs walked by and looked at it and said, "What is that thing?" And so the vendor actually gave them the keys and said, "Why don't you just go see what you like?" So they came back 2 days later and said, "Wow, could you put a prop guard here so we could hang off this thing?" And they thought of all these different things that no one had even thought about. They're operating with that thing, right? So again, very, very subtle point, and it seems like you would do it this way, but we hadn't been doing it that way, right? It was really, from my perspective, a lot of great technology and a lot of experimentation going on, but not talking close enough to the warfighter, if that makes any sense.
Any other?
If not, I do have a question.
We got one more.
Yes. Can I go first? Admiral, you first? Oh, thank you very much. I'll be on later today as well. I'm Jeroen de Jong. I work at TNO in the Netherlands, which is a research and development institute. However, we are thinking very hardly with our naval, not customer, but partner, about innovation also during the life cycle. Because what I heard is introducing capabilities as fast as possible, which is very good. But once they're in service, they need to be innovated on as well. And that is a very intricate process that needs to be in the organization as well. How do you look at that?
Because we're experimenting with it in theater. So when Commodore Brasser comes in and speaks, ask him that question. Commodore Brasser is the Commodore of Task Force Command. But what's happening is that they're just very, very rapid cycles, right? But the other thing we're doing is connecting all the innovation together. One of the things that we were cognizant, we were aware of, is that we have an experiment and everybody go home. And you lose all the innovation. And then you have the next experiment, everybody go home. And so what we do is we make sure there's a central point, because I'm very focused on what's the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. So I look at all the experiments and we move everything, all the experiments forward and advance them, right? To close the gap with innovation, right? The other thing we do is, don't want to. Think about if you've got a minimal viable product, like the sail drone. Right now, we can do some interesting things. It's essentially got a camera on it. We can put sensors on it. But imagine if you said, I want to put something else on it. Well, we can keep that thing in theater, but then take a couple off and start experimenting while you're doing it concurrently, not just take the entire thing off, right? So I think what we try to do is keep the operational problem in sight, have somebody centrally coordinate all the innovation that's going on, and keep the dialogue. It's just not a one and done. I think the other thing we do is we really talk to industry a lot. I remember when I came into this job, I said, I always have industry guys knocking on my door and they want to talk to me, and everybody says, well, you can't talk to them. Well, why not? Because they're trying to spend their investment dollars trying to figure out what I want. I got a crazy idea. Why don't I tell them what I need? But not just in a technological point of view. I'll show them the strategy and I'll show them the operational problem and let them figure it out, right? And then I can have very different ways of doing it, as opposed to me writing very prescriptive requirements of saying it's got to be a bottle about 12 inches tall. No, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. You tell me a different way of solving it. So that's another way we try to solve it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So one last question. We spoke about a collective mentality. We spoke about common standards.
would you say that there is a time for the West, and I use the word carefully, the West, not NATO or Europe, because there are also countries in Asia, for example, who identify with the West. Is it time for the West to come together and have an approach, or to establish common models or common work cooperation for common standards? I feel it is, but
yeah, that's a great question, and that discussion is already kind of happening. So there's nothing magical happening in Task Force 9 in the Arabian Gulf that can't be done everywhere else. And so that we're starting to have those discussions, and people look at it. Let me tell you, and I want to come back to something you said. So certainly the U.S. is very interested in certain things, we're potential adversaries. But there are other countries who could really care less about potential adversary because that's not the problem. But they certainly are worried about piracy, illegal fishing, illegal activity, immigration. And so for maritime domain awareness, you may be worried about something completely different than we're worried about, but you're very worried about maritime domain awareness and what's happening around your country. And so you can use the same sort of sensors to collect that data, and you share the data, and then everybody uses it for whatever they need to go do, and at a much, much cheaper price point. So you can take that model and put it in Asia tomorrow. There's, again, nothing magical, and all it entails is having distributed sensors with common standard and agreed upon standards and share information. So absolutely. But again, it forces that discussion of what is the standard? Who's going to define the standard? But no, absolutely. I think I foresee that's what's going to happen fairly quickly.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for your presentation, Captain Salim, the Navy General Staff. When it comes to employing the common field, the new technology, that means new equipment, it's not only a problem on service support, but also training of people to correctly employ this kind of equipment. So how are you facing this kind of aspect in consideration pretty fast?
So that's really a great question. And so I don't know if you guys heard the question. So how do you train your people? So when you talk to the guys that we're leasing these things, they said you no longer have to think about that. You're leasing a service. Well, what does that mean? Because the first question I got, well, who are we going to train? Who's the sailors going to operate? Who's going to go do this? I don't know. Right now we're just experimenting with it, right? To see. So I'm not building a Naval Academy for unmanned because I don't even know if I want to use it necessarily yet, right? So we're just experimenting quickly. But when I talk to the vendors like the Saildrone or Martzoukos or these other guys, they're like, we're buying a service. We do that for you. We update the software, we change the batteries. So then, of course, the question is, well, what happens when the war starts and the shooting starts? I don't know. So maybe instead of having a contractor-owned, contractor-operated model, it's going to be a government-owned contractor-operator, or it's going to be a government-owned, government-operated. We don't know yet. But what's happening, what's allowing this to happen right now by doing the leasing, is we get to access to the technology very quickly, and then we get to experiment. And then we decide, it doesn't really do what we want to go do on to the next thing, right? And so we're learning that. And so what's happened is, I think in the US Navy, the discussion of having, I don't know, is not an acceptable answer. I can't tell you what it's going to look like in a year from now. All I'm telling you is I'm learning a lot more about it, right? So I'd like to tell the story of a year ago, if you put a television camera in my face and said, Mr. Stewart, is AI important? I would have said, absolutely. And if somebody had said, can you tell me why? I would have no idea. But I know I needed to answer that question, right? So it wasn't until we started experimenting and then I realized, and it was the example I just told you. Again, imagine an operations center. There's 100 contacts. And you have naval officers running around. I saw this in the Gulf of Aqaba. And on the right-hand side, 7 sensors integrated running algorithms. And I don't want to speak for him, but Vice Admiral Cooper was with me. And he's a warfighter. He's not really a technology. He is a warfighter. And when he saw the difference that you had 20 guys that could maybe tell you what's going on, and maybe 2 guys could tell you exactly what was going on, and oh, by the way, you missed these other 15 contacts that you were completely unaware of. As a warfighter, we looked at that way. Now I'm the believer, right? So that didn't happen until we experimented with it, right? It was just getting somebody's idea. So the whole idea of leasing, going fast, experimenting with warfighters, move very, very quickly, and you innovate a lot faster.
Any other question? Okay, so I thank first of all the speakers and all of you for this very interesting and live question and answer period. The exhibition is now open and you can visit and support our sponsors, and then we can share coffee. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we would have without having to pronounce one of his name.
Oh, thank you for the question. Since approach has been adopted by most of the world countries, then it creates custom, which must be respected by everyone. Μήπως έχετε εσείς ένα στικάκι δικό μου? Έδωσα στον κύριο Φουντουλάκη 2 στικάκια, just in case. Μου έδωσε το ένα, λέει το άλλο πρέπει να είναι στο λάπτοπ. Τώρα ποιο λάπτοπ, αυτό πίσω δεν ξέρω. Και δεν με νοιάζει τόσο, αλλά έχω φορτώσει και άλλα πράγματα εκεί μέσα και θα τα ήθελα. Νομίζω ναι. Έκανα μαζί μου ουσιαστικά και σήμερα.